73 missed calls. That's what I saw when I woke up on Christmas morning, 2024. Every single one from my son, Robert. The same son who, 3 weeks earlier, had sent me a text message that would shatter 4 decades of my motherhood into 22 carefully chosen words. We just want a peaceful Christmas with the younger crowd. Please don't take it personally. Don't come. I'm 70 years old. I'd spent 3 months preparing for this Christmas. The gifts were already wrapped in red and gold paper, each one chosen with the kind of care only a grandmother knows. The gingerbread cookies sat in tins I'd been collecting since Robert was a boy. The tree stood in my living room, decorated with ornaments that told the story of my family. Ornaments I'd hung with hands that trembled just slightly with age and anticipation. And then my phone buzzed at 6:47 p.m. on December 3rd. And everything I thought I knew about my place in my son's life collapsed in the time it took to read a text message. But here's what Robert didn't know when he pressed send on that message. Here's what he couldn't have predicted when he decided I wasn't welcome at Christmas. I didn't cry. I didn't call him begging for an explanation. I didn't spend the holiday alone in my house, staring at wrapped presents that would never be opened, mourning a celebration that had been taken from me. No. I spent $52,000 on the most extraordinary Christmas of my life. I booked a luxury villa in the mountains of Colorado, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the snow-covered peaks like a painting. I invited people who actually wanted me there, friends who had never once made me feel like an obligation. I wore the turquoise cashmere dress I'd bought 3 years ago, but never worn because my daughter-in-law Emily had texted at the last minute to say the party was casual and I might feel overdressed. I hired a string quartet. I served lobster and champagne. I laughed until my sides hurt. And someone took pictures. Several people took pictures, actually, because the villa was stunning and the celebration was the kind of warm, genuine gathering that makes people want to capture the moment. Those pictures made their way to social media. They were tagged with the location. They showed me in that turquoise dress, radiant and joyful, surrounded by people who were genuinely happy to be in my presence. And Robert saw them. Robert, who had uninvited his mother from Christmas because he wanted something peaceful with the younger crowd, saw those pictures on Christmas Eve. That's when the calling started. 73 times in 24 hours. Not to wish me Merry Christmas. Not to apologize for the cruelty of that text message. Robert called because he needed something. And suddenly, his mother, who wasn't welcome at his table, was very much needed in his life. This is the story of what happened when I finally said no. It's the story of how I spent 70 years putting everyone else first and learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is love yourself. It's about the text messages that followed those 73 calls, messages that revealed exactly why Robert had suddenly remembered he had a mother. It's about the confrontation in a small cafe 5 days later, where I said the words I'd needed to say for years, and it's about what I gained when I stopped waiting for my son to see my value. Because here's what you need to understand before we go any further. This isn't just a story about one Christmas or one text message. This is about a pattern that had been building for years, a slow erasure that I'd explained away as busyness, as generational differences, as anything except what it actually was: disrespect wrapped in politeness. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos, because what happens next in my story will challenge everything you think you know about family obligations and unconditional love. To understand why 73 phone calls didn't move me, why I could look at my son's name flashing on my screen again and again and feel nothing but calm resolve, you have to understand the years that came before that December text message. You have to understand what it means to slowly disappear from your own child's life while standing right in front of them. I'd been Robert's mother for 42 years. I remembered the weight of him as a newborn. 7 pounds and 3 ounces of possibility and hope. I remembered his first day of kindergarten when he clung to my hand so tightly I had to pry his fingers loose one by one, whispering promises that I'd be there when school ended. I kept that promise. I kept every promise. When Robert was 8 and wanted to play hockey, I drove him to practice at 5 in the morning, 3 times a week, for 6 years. When he was 16 and wrecked the car my husband Daniel and I had saved for months to buy him, I didn't yell. I held him while he cried and then helped him figure out how to make it right. When Robert went to college, Daniel and I paid for everything the scholarships didn't cover. When he called home during his sophomore year, voice tight with panic, because he was $3,500 short on tuition and registration was the next day, I had the money transferred within an hour. I didn't ask why he'd miscalculated or suggest he get a job or tell him this would be a good learning experience about financial responsibility. I just fixed it. I always fixed it. Robert never said thank you. Not then. Not ever. Really. He sent a text 2 weeks later that said, "Got it," and that was the end of the conversation. I told myself that was just how his generation communicated, brief and efficient. Nothing personal. I told myself a lot of things over the years, crafting explanations for behavior that hurt, because the alternative, that my son simply didn't value me, was too painful to accept. When Robert married Emily 6 years ago, I was thrilled. I'd wanted my son to find partnership and love. I'd wanted him to build a family of his own. What I hadn't expected was how quickly I would become expendable in the family I'd built. It started small, little moments that stung but seemed too minor to address without sounding petty or oversensitive. I would offer to help with something, excited to be included, and Emily would smile that tight smile and say they had it handled. I brought homemade soup when Robert had the flu, the same recipe I'd made throughout his childhood, and Emily accepted it at the door without inviting me in. "He's sleeping," Emily said, though I could hear the television on in the background. "I'll make sure he gets this." "Thanks." The door closed before I could respond. I stood on my son's porch, holding the empty containers I'd planned to swap for the full ones, trying to understand when showing up with soup for your sick child had become an intrusion. When Robert and Emily had their first baby, a boy they named Jacob, I thought things would change. I thought becoming a grandmother would give me a place in their lives again. I knitted a blanket for the baby, cream-colored with a delicate cable pattern, the kind of project that takes weeks of evening work. My hands weren't as nimble as they used to be, and I had to redo several sections, but I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted Jacob to have something made with love, something that would last. I brought it to the hospital the day after he was born, tears in my eyes as I held my grandson for the first time. The blanket was in the crib a week later when I visited. It was gone the week after that. "Where's the blanket I made?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Emily glanced at the crib and then back at me. "Oh, we had to switch it out. Jacob has really sensitive skin, and the yarn was irritating him. We're using only organic cotton now. Doctor's orders." I nodded because what else could I do? But I'd used the softest merino wool I could find, hypoallergenic and specifically chosen for sensitive skin. I didn't argue. I just felt something small and hard settle in my chest, a seed of understanding that I wasn't ready to let grow. The erasure continued in ways both subtle and overt. I offered to babysit so Robert and Emily could have a date night. "We don't want to get Jacob used to things we can't maintain," Emily said, as if my presence in my grandson's life was a temporary luxury rather than a permanent relationship. I invited them for Sunday dinners, a tradition I'd maintained with my own parents throughout Robert's childhood. They came twice, then started canceling. Too tired. Jacob's nap schedule. Emily's parents were in town. Work event. The excuses varied, but the message was consistent. They had other priorities. When Jacob turned 1, I asked if I could bring a cake. I'd already planned it. A simple smash cake in the shape of a teddy bear. Emily hesitated in a way that made my stomach drop. "Actually, we're doing a very specific theme, and we've already ordered from a bakery. But thank you for offering." I hadn't been told about the theme. I hadn't been consulted about the party plans at all. I found out the date from a Facebook post. I showed up with a wrapped gift, a wooden puzzle I'd found at a craft fair, handmade and beautiful. Jacob seemed to enjoy it, grabbing at the pieces with chubby fingers. Emily watched for a moment, and then gently took it away. "These pieces might be a choking hazard," she said. "We're being really careful about age-appropriate toys." The puzzle was labeled for ages 1 and up. I'd checked 3 times. I didn't mention this. I was learning that contradicting Emily led nowhere productive. 2 years passed in this fashion, 2 years of me trying to find my place in a family structure that seemed designed to exclude me. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that young parents were protective, and that was natural. I told myself that Emily's parents probably faced the same limitations. Though when I saw photos from family gatherings on social media, Emily's mother was always prominently featured, holding Jacob, laughing at some shared joke. I told myself those were just the photos that got posted. I told myself a lot of lies. Last spring, something happened that should have been a warning. I'd been scrolling through Facebook when I saw photos from Jacob's 3rd birthday party. The party, I'd been told, was just immediate family, too small and intimate to include extended relatives. The photos showed at least 30 people. Emily's entire family, Emily's friends from work, Emily's book club, people I'd never met, celebrating my grandson's birthday at an event I'd been deliberately excluded from. When I called Robert that night, hands shaking with hurt and confusion, he sighed like I was being difficult. "Mom, it just got bigger than we planned. We didn't think you'd want to deal with that many people." "You didn't give me the choice," I said quietly. "I would have dealt with anything to see Jacob on his birthday." "Look, I don't want to make this a thing," Robert said, his voice taking on that edge that meant the conversation was ending, whether I was finished or not. "We're doing our best here. Emily's overwhelmed. Can you just not add to the stress?" I hung up feeling like I'd been the one who'd done something wrong. I'd been excluded from my grandson's birthday, and somehow I was the problem for being hurt about it. That summer, I tried a different approach. I stopped offering. I stopped asking. I waited to be invited. I thought maybe if I gave them space, they'd realize they missed me. They'd reach out. 3 months passed without a single phone call from Robert. No texts except a forwarded meme he'd probably sent to 20 people. No requests to visit. No invitations to their home. My birthday came and went. Robert sent a card, signed by all of them, including a scribbled "From Jacob" that was clearly Emily's handwriting. Inside was a gift card to a restaurant I'd mentioned enjoying once, 4 years ago. It was a perfectly polite, completely impersonal gesture from someone who used to know my favorite everything. That's when I started to understand. I wasn't losing my place in their lives through some series of unfortunate misunderstandings. I was being edged out deliberately, carefully, with plausible deniability at every turn. In October, I decided to try one more time. I called Robert and asked if Daniel and I could take Jacob to the pumpkin patch. Just for an afternoon, just to make a memory. "Let me check with Emily," Robert said. He called back 3 days later. "It's not a good weekend. Maybe another time." There was never another time. There was never a good weekend. There was never space for me in the life of my son and grandson unless they needed something. And they did need things. In August, Robert called asking if Daniel and I could help with a down payment on a bigger house. They were outgrowing the starter home I'd already helped them buy. "It would just be a loan," Robert said. "We'd pay you back." Daniel and I discussed it. We had the money. We'd been saving, planning for retirement, for travel, for the kind of freedom that comes when you've worked for 40 years and finally get to live for yourself. But this was our son. We transferred $35,000. Robert texted 2 days later. "Got it, thanks." No phone call, no acknowledgement of the sacrifice, no updates on the house hunt or invitation to see the new place once they moved. I didn't hear from him again until December 3rd. The text arrived at 6:47 p.m. while I was arranging pine cones and candles, humming along to a Christmas carol playing softly in the background. I'd already wrapped Jacob's presents, 6 of them, chosen carefully over months of shopping. I'd baked 3 kinds of cookies, Robert's childhood favorites. I'd bought a new tablecloth for Christmas dinner, red with small gold stars, festive without being overwhelming. I'd been planning this Christmas since September, mentally arranging who would sit where, what I'd serve, how I'd make sure Jacob had the most magical day possible. The text was 22 words long. "We just want a peaceful Christmas with the younger crowd. Please don't take it personally. Don't come." I read it 3 times. My brain kept insisting I must have misunderstood. The younger crowd, as if Daniel and I were ancient relics whose presence would somehow taint the joy of the holiday. Please don't take it personally. That phrase made me want to scream. How else was I supposed to take being uninvited from Christmas? I sat down hard on the stairs, my legs suddenly unreliable. The Christmas tree Daniel and I had decorated 2 nights ago stood in the corner, lights twinkling, angel topper slightly crooked. I'd left it that way on purpose, planning to let Jacob fix it, imagining his delight at being tall enough to reach. He'd never see it now. None of them would. Daniel came in from the garage 20 minutes later to find me still sitting there. Phone in my lap, face expressionless. "Ellie?" he said, using the nickname he'd called me for 47 years of marriage. "What happened?" I handed him the phone without speaking. He read the message once, then looked at me with eyes that held no surprise, only a deep, tired sadness. "I'm sorry," he said. Not surprised. Sorry. As if he'd been expecting this, waiting for the moment when our son's disregard would finally become undeniable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying years of moments I'd misinterpreted as love. The pattern was so clear now that I was looking at it directly. Daniel and I were useful when Robert needed money, needed help, needed something fixed or solved or handled. The moment the crisis passed, we disappeared back into irrelevance until the next emergency. We weren't family, we were a resource, and now we weren't even invited to Christmas. I got up at 2 in the morning and went downstairs. I sat in the living room with all the lights off except the Christmas tree, watching the colors shift and blur. I thought about calling Robert, demanding an explanation, asking what I'd done to deserve this, but I already knew I'd done nothing. That was the cruelest part. There was no specific offense I could apologize for, no mistake I could correct. My crime was existing as an older generation when my son wanted to celebrate with a younger one. My crime was loving him more than he wanted to be loved. At 3 a.m., Daniel came downstairs and found me there. He didn't ask if I was okay. He could see I wasn't. He sat down beside me and took my hand, the same hand he'd held through 4 decades of marriage, through raising Robert, through every joy and disappointment our life together had held. "If they don't want our warmth," Daniel said quietly, "maybe it's time we showed them what they're really rejecting." I turned to look at my husband. His face was illuminated by the soft glow of the Christmas lights, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't expected. Not resignation, resolve. "What do you mean?" I asked. Daniel squeezed my hand. "I mean, we have money we were going to spend on them for Christmas. We have time we were going to give them. We have love we were going to pour into people who made it very clear they don't want it." He paused, making sure I was really hearing him. "What if we spent all of that on ourselves instead?" The idea was so foreign to me that I almost laughed. Spend Christmas on ourselves? After a lifetime of making the holiday about everyone else, especially after Robert was born, it felt selfish. It felt wrong. It felt absolutely necessary. Where would we even go? I asked. The question itself, feeling like a betrayal of everything I'd been taught about motherhood and sacrifice. Daniel smiled, a real smile, the first I'd seen from him in months. "Anywhere we want," he said. "Anywhere they're not." That conversation at 3 in the morning became the moment my life split into before and after. Before, I had been a mother who would accept any crumb of affection, any minimal gesture, because I believed that's what mothers did. After, I became a woman who remembered I was more than just Robert's mother. I was Margaret. I had value that existed independently of whether my son recognized it. The next morning, Daniel and I sat down with our laptop and started searching. Not for small, apologetic getaways that would make us easy to reach if Robert changed his mind. We looked at luxury resorts, the kind of places I'd always scrolled past because that money could go to Robert, could help with something he needed, could be saved for an emergency that always seemed to involve our son. We found Valley Ridge Estate in the mountains of Colorado. The photos looked like something from a magazine, a sprawling villa with windows that framed the peaks, a stone fireplace tall enough to stand in, heated floors, and a chef's kitchen and bedrooms, with views that made you forget the world existed. The price was $52,000 for the week of Christmas. My hand hovered over the trackpad, unable to click. That was more money than we'd spent on vacations in the past 10 years combined. That was money that could go to Jacob's college fund, could help Robert with whatever financial crisis would inevitably come next, could be saved and invested and kept safe for people who would never appreciate the sacrifice. "Do it," Daniel said. His voice was steady. "Click the button, Ellie. Choose us." I clicked. The confirmation email arrived 30 seconds later, and with it came a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Not guilt, not anxiety about whether this was the right choice, just a pure, clean sense of taking up space in my own life. We booked the villa. Then we started planning. Not a quiet, subdued Christmas that would make us easy to forgive and welcome back. A celebration. A real one. I called my friend Susan, who had been telling me for 3 years that I needed to stand up for myself. "We're having Christmas at a resort in Colorado," I said, the words still feeling strange in my mouth. "Would you and Tom want to join us?" The silence on the other end lasted just long enough for me to panic, to think I'd made a mistake, to prepare an apology for the presumption. Then Susan laughed, a delighted sound that made my eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Are you kidding? We'd love to. What finally made you do it?" "Robert uninvited me from Christmas," I said. I waited for the sympathy, the reassurances that he didn't mean it, the suggestions for how I could fix this. Instead, Susan said, "Good for you for not accepting that. Good for you. Not I'm sorry. Not how awful. Good for you." I called 3 more friends that day. Every single one said yes immediately. They all sounded excited, genuinely thrilled to be included. Nobody asked what they could bring, or whether their dietary restrictions would be accommodated, or whether I was sure I wanted to host. They just said yes, and thank you, and when do we leave? This, I realized, was what it felt like to be wanted. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of planning. I bought a new dress, the turquoise cashmere I'd been too afraid to wear to Robert's party 3 years ago. Daniel and I arranged for a caterer, a string quartet, decorations that would make the villa look like something from a winter fairy tale. We told no one in Robert's family, not because I was trying to hide or punish, but because it genuinely didn't occur to me that I needed their permission or knowledge. I was done running my decisions through the filter of what Robert might think. On December 20th, Daniel and I loaded our car and drove to Colorado. The villa was somehow more beautiful than the photos. When I walked through the front door and saw the view, saw the space and light and possibility, I had to sit down. This was mine. For 1 week, this extraordinary place was mine, and I hadn't needed anyone's approval to claim it. Our friends arrived throughout the day. By evening, the villa was full of laughter and conversation, people who were genuinely happy to be together. I realized I'd forgotten what that sounded like, the kind of talk that flows easily because no one is performing or managing someone else's expectations. That night, I put on the turquoise dress. It fit perfectly. I'd been so afraid it wouldn't that 3 years had changed my body in ways that would make the dress unwearable, but it was perfect. Daniel saw me and stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with Tom. "Ellie," he said, and the way he said it made me feel beautiful in a way I hadn't in years. Christmas Eve, we had the celebration I'd been imagining, just with completely different people. The table was set with white linens and gold chargers. The food was extraordinary. Lobster tails and perfectly cooked steaks and vegetables that tasted like they'd been harvested that morning. The string quartet played in the corner, filling the space with music that made everything feel magical. I looked around the table at people who had shown up for me, people who said thank you and meant it, people who were present because they wanted to be, not because they felt obligated. Susan raised her glass at one point during dinner. "To Margaret," she said, for finally realizing that her presence isn't a burden, for choosing herself, for showing the rest of us what that looks like. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt tears slide down my face, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that come when you finally let yourself feel something you've been holding back for too long. I was happy. After months of feeling invisible, I was radiantly, undeniably happy. People took pictures throughout the evening, not because I asked them to, but because the villa was stunning and the celebration felt special, and that's what people do at moments they want to remember. Susan posted a photo to Facebook, me in my turquoise dress by the fireplace, smiling in a way that reached my eyes. Tom's wife shared an Instagram story of the quartet playing, the windows behind them showing snow falling against the dark sky. The location was tagged, Valley Ridge Estate, Colorado, Christmas Eve. I didn't think about who might see the photos. I wasn't trying to send a message or prove anything. I was just living my life, and other people were documenting it because it was worth documenting. But Robert saw them. Later, I would learn exactly when. 11:43 p.m. on Christmas Eve. He was scrolling through Facebook, probably unable to sleep with whatever stress he'd decided was more important than his mother's presence, and he saw Susan's post. Saw his mother looking happier than he'd seen me look in years. Saw the luxury villa in the background. Saw the tags and comments from people saying things like, "Most beautiful Christmas ever, and you deserve this, Margaret." That's when he started calling. The first call came at 11:47 p.m. My phone was in my bedroom upstairs, charging. I didn't hear it. I was downstairs with my friends, listening to the quartet play Silent Night, feeling peace in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The calls kept coming, every few minutes throughout the night. By the time I woke up on Christmas morning and reached for my phone to check the time, there were 73 missed calls. All from Robert, no calls from Emily. No calls wishing me Merry Christmas. Just Robert, over and over, the desperation visible in the frequency. I need to take you back to that exact moment, December 3rd, 6:47 p.m., because understanding what happened in those first few minutes will help you understand why I didn't answer a single one of those 73 calls on Christmas morning. I was in my living room setting out the pine cones Jacob loved to paint. Every year since he was 2, we'd collected them together from the park near my house, and I'd save them for Christmas when he could turn them into ornaments. I had 23 pine cones lined up on newspaper, along with the paint set I'd bought, the child-safe kind that washes off easily. I was humming Silent Night. Daniel was in the garage working on the snowblower because the forecast called for heavy snow the week of Christmas, and he wanted to be prepared. The house smelled like pine candles and the gingerbread cookies cooling on the kitchen counter. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. And then my phone buzzed on the counter. You know that feeling when you open a message and somehow, before you even finish reading it, your body already knows something terrible is coming? My hands went cold first. Not my chest, not my stomach. My hands. They started to tingle and then went numb, and I almost dropped the phone. The message was from Robert. 22 words. "We just want a peaceful Christmas with the younger crowd. Please don't take it personally. Don't come." I read it 3 times. The first time, I thought I'd misunderstood. Maybe he meant, don't come early, or don't come to some other event I'd forgotten about. The second time, I thought maybe he'd sent it to the wrong person, though I couldn't imagine who else he'd be uninviting from Christmas. The third time, I knew. There was no misunderstanding. My son had just told me not to come to Christmas. Please don't take it personally. That phrase stuck in my throat like a piece of glass. How else was I supposed to take being uninvited from Christmas? How do you not take that personally? I sat down hard on the stairs. My legs just gave out. I didn't plan to sit, didn't walk over to the stairs thinking I needed to rest. One moment I was standing in the kitchen holding my phone, and the next I was sitting on the 3rd step up, phone in my lap, staring at the Christmas tree Daniel and I had decorated 2 nights earlier. The angel on top was tilted slightly to the left. I'd left it that way on purpose because I was planning to let Jacob straighten it. He'd grown so much this year, and I thought he'd be tall enough to reach if Daniel lifted him up. He'd be so proud. But he wouldn't see it now. None of them would. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the living room to get darker as the sun set. Long enough for my legs to go stiff. Long enough for Daniel to finish with the snowblower and come inside, stomping snow off his boots in the mudroom. He called my name. Ellie? I heard him, but I couldn't answer. He came into the living room and saw me sitting there on the stairs, phone in my lap, and his face changed. "What happened?" he asked, but his voice was careful, like he already knew it was bad. I handed him the phone without saying anything. I watched his face as he read the message. I was waiting for surprise, for anger, for him to tell me there must be some mistake. His face didn't show surprise. It showed resignation. that deep, tired sadness of someone who'd been expecting this, who'd seen it coming long before I was willing to admit it. He handed the phone back and sat down beside me on the stairs. "I'm sorry," he said. Not, "Call him and ask what he means." Not, "There must be an explanation." Just, "I'm sorry," because he knew. Daniel had been watching our son pull away for years, and he'd tried to tell me, gently, carefully, but I hadn't wanted to hear it. I'd made excuses. They're busy with the baby. Young parents need space. Emily's just protective. Every time Daniel suggested that maybe Robert didn't value us the way he should, I defended our son. And now, here was the proof. 22 words that made it impossible to pretend anymore. For 42 years, I'd been Robert's mother. I'd changed his diapers, the cloth kind because we couldn't afford disposables back then. I'd sat up with him through fevers, through nightmares, through the time he had pneumonia at age 6, and I didn't sleep for 3 days straight because I was terrified to take my eyes off him. I'd paid for his college when the scholarships fell through, worked extra hours tutoring to cover what we couldn't pull from savings. I'd given him $35,000 just 4 months ago for a down payment on a bigger house. $35,000 we'd been saving for retirement, for the trip to Ireland Daniel had been dreaming about for 20 years. We'd given it without hesitation because he said he needed it. And now I wasn't invited to Christmas. I sat on those stairs, and something shifted in my mind, like a kaleidoscope turning, and suddenly all the scattered pieces formed a pattern I'd been refusing to see. This wasn't the first time Robert had pushed me away. It was just the first time he'd done it in words I couldn't misinterpret. That night, sitting on those stairs with Daniel beside me and the crooked angel watching from the Christmas tree, I started seeing all the other moments. The little rejections I'd explained away, the times I'd told myself, they're just busy, they're building their own traditions, it's not personal, but it was personal. It had been for years. Last spring, when Emily told me not to post photos of Jacob on Facebook because it might make things awkward with her side of the family, I deleted every single picture. Every one. Photos of Jacob's first steps, his second birthday, the day we went to the zoo, and he laughed so hard at the penguins that strangers stopped to smile at him. Gone. Emily never said thank you. She never acknowledged that I'd done it. She just expected compliance, and I'd given it. 2 months ago, when I brought over homemade cookies, the chocolate chip ones Robert had loved since he was 5 years old, Emily had taken them at the door with that tight smile. "We're really trying to cut back on sweets for Jacob," she said. "But thanks." The door closed before I could respond. I stood on their porch, holding my empty Tupperware container, wondering when my homemade cookies had become an imposition. 6 months ago, I'd offered to babysit so they could have a date night. "We don't want to get Jacob used to things we can't maintain," Emily had said. I'd thought she meant they couldn't afford regular babysitters and didn't want Jacob to expect what they couldn't provide. But now, sitting on those stairs, I understood what she really meant. My presence in Jacob's life was temporary, dispensable, something not worth getting him attached to. I tried to remember the last time Robert had hugged me without being prompted. I couldn't. I tried to remember the last time he'd called just to talk, not because he needed something or was returning a call I'd made first. I couldn't remember that either. I tried to remember the last time he'd said I love you without me saying it first. Nothing. The memories just weren't there. When had I become optional in my son's life? When had I gone from mother to inconvenience? I couldn't pinpoint an exact moment. It had happened slowly, so gradually that I hadn't noticed until I was already erased. Daniel didn't try to make me feel better. He didn't tell me I was overreacting or that Robert didn't mean it the way it sounded. He just sat with me in the growing darkness, our shoulders touching, and let me arrive at the truth in my own time. Finally, he spoke. "If they don't want our warmth, maybe it's time we showed them what they're really rejecting." I turned to look at him. His face was illuminated by the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not resignation, resolve. Daniel had always been the steady one, the one who kept peace, who smoothed over conflicts, who suggested we give people the benefit of the doubt. But something in his voice told me he was done smoothing. He was done making excuses for our son's behavior. "What do you mean?" I asked. My voice sounded strange, hoarse from not speaking. I mean, we have money we were going to spend on them for Christmas, Daniel said. We have time we were going to give them. We have love we were going to pour into people who just told us they don't want it. What if we spent all of that on ourselves instead? This was the moment. I could have called Robert. I could have apologized for whatever I'd done to make him feel like my presence would ruin his peaceful Christmas. I didn't even know what I'd be apologizing for. Existing? Being old? Being inconvenient? I could have begged to be included, promised to stay quiet, to not bring too many gifts, to not take too many photos, to leave early if they wanted. I'd done it before. Last Thanksgiving, I'd called Robert after not hearing from him for 2 weeks. Just wanted to check if you got the gift I sent Jacob, I'd said on his voicemail, keeping my voice light and cheerful. No rush calling back. Love you. He never called back. I'd found out later from his Facebook photos that they'd spent Thanksgiving with Emily's parents. Nobody had mentioned it to me. Nobody thought I needed to know. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the word peaceful. As if my presence was chaos, as if loving my grandson was a disturbance, as if I was the problem that needed to be removed for their holiday to be enjoyable. That night, I didn't cry. I expected to. I thought once the shock wore off, I'd break down, sob into Daniel's shoulder, mourn the loss of the Christmas I'd been planning for months. But the tears didn't come. What came instead was anger, not the hot, explosive kind, the cold, clarifying kind that burns away confusion and leaves only truth. I got angry, and then I got an idea. But before I tell you what I decided to do, you need to understand how deep this pattern of rejection went. Because this wasn't just about one text message or one Christmas. This was about years of being slowly erased from my own son's life, and I'd let it happen. I'd made it easy. I'd accepted every excuse, swallowed every hurt, convinced myself that being a good mother meant never making my son uncomfortable, even when his comfort required my invisibility. The baby blanket was where it started, though I didn't recognize it then. I'd spent 6 weeks knitting it. My hands aren't what they used to be, and arthritis makes the small movements difficult. But I wanted Jacob to have something made with love, something that would last. Cream-colored merino wool with a delicate cable pattern. I'd chosen every detail carefully, used hypoallergenic yarn specifically designed for sensitive baby skin. The blanket was in Jacob's crib the first week. I saw it when I visited, tucked around him while he slept. And my heart had swelled with the kind of joy that only grandmothers understand. The next week, it was gone, replaced with a plain organic cotton blanket, the kind you buy at expensive baby stores that pride themselves on being better than homemade. Where's the blanket I made? I'd asked Emily, trying to keep my voice casual. She'd glanced at the crib and then back at me with that expression I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant she was about to explain why my effort wasn't good enough. Oh, we had to switch it out. Jacob has really sensitive skin, and the yarn was irritating him. We're using only organic cotton now. Doctor's orders. Doctor's orders. That phrase was impossible to argue with. What kind of grandmother argues with doctor's orders? So I'd nodded and smiled and said, of course, whatever's best for Jacob. I didn't mention that I'd researched yarn for weeks, specifically to avoid irritating sensitive skin. I didn't mention that merino wool is naturally hypoallergenic. I just felt something small and hard settle in my chest, a seed of understanding I wasn't ready to let grow. Then there was the science kit. Jacob was turning 4, and I'd found this beautiful educational toy at a craft fair, a hands-on learning kit with magnets and prisms and simple machines. Nothing electronic, nothing with screens, just the kind of tactile exploration I remembered Robert loving at that age. I'd wrapped it carefully and brought it to Jacob's birthday party, the small family-only gathering I'd been told about. Emily had opened it while Jacob played with wrapping paper, her smile tightening with each item she pulled from the box. "This is lovely," she'd said in that voice that meant it wasn't lovely at all. "But it's not really age-appropriate. We're trying to limit screen-related thinking right now." Screen-related thinking. The kit had no screens. It was literally the opposite of screens. But it's hands-on. I'd started to explain. Magnets and lenses, and Emily had cut me off with a firm shake of her head. "We'll handle his education, Margaret. We have a whole curriculum planned. We'll handle his education." As if I was interfering, overstepping. trying to parent her child. I'd brought a 4-year-old a toy. I'd thought that was what grandmothers did. Apparently, I was wrong. The mortgage payment might have been the moment I should have understood. Last August, Robert had called. Not texted, actually called. Which should have been my first warning, because he never called, unless he needed something. "Mom, I have a huge favor to ask," he'd said, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "We found a house. The perfect house. Bigger yard for Jacob, good school district, everything we wanted. But we're $35,000 short on the down payment, and if we don't act fast, we'll lose it." $35,000. Daniel and I had discussed it that night, sitting at the kitchen table with our retirement account statements spread between us. We had the money. We'd been saving for years, planning for the freedom that comes when you've worked for 4 decades and finally get to live for yourself. Daniel wanted to take me to Ireland. We'd been talking about it since before Robert was born, this dream trip we'd someday take. $35,000 would cover it, the flights and hotels and all the castles and coasts we'd promised ourselves we'd see. But this was our son, our only child. He needed help. How could we say no? We transferred the money the next morning. I called Robert to let him know it was coming. "You're a lifesaver, Mom," he'd said. "I'll pay you back as soon as we can." I'd told him not to worry about paying us back. I'd told him we were happy to help. I told him we loved him. "Love you too," he'd said quickly. "I've got to run. Emily's waiting in the car. Thank you again." That was the last conversation we had about it. 2 days later, he texted, "Got it. Thanks." That was it. No phone call to tell us they'd made an offer, no updates on the house hunt, no invitation to see the new place once they moved. 3 months later, I'd seen photos on Facebook of their housewarming party, Emily's family, filling the new living room we'd helped pay for. I hadn't known they'd moved. Nobody thought to tell me. Nobody thought I'd want to know. I'd stared at those photos for a long time, Daniel reading over my shoulder. "Let it go, Ellie," he'd said quietly. "You can't force gratitude." But I wasn't trying to force gratitude. I just wanted to be remembered. I just wanted to matter. I couldn't remember the last time Robert had hugged me without being prompted. Every visit ended the same way. I'd lean in for a hug and he'd give me that quick, obligatory squeeze, the kind you give distant relatives at funerals. No warmth, no real contact, just performance. I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked how I was doing and waited for a real answer instead of the automatic fine people give when they don't want to burden anyone with truth. I couldn't remember when I became optional in my own son's life. But sitting on those stairs on December 3rd, staring at that text message, I finally let myself see it. The pattern, the years of rejection dressed up as boundaries, of dismissal wrapped in politeness, of erasure disguised as independence. They didn't want me at Christmas because they didn't want me at all. I was useful when they needed money. I was tolerated when keeping me away required more effort than including me. But I wasn't valued. I wasn't wanted. I was convenient until I wasn't. And now I wasn't. But here's what Robert didn't know. Here's what he couldn't have predicted when he pressed send on that text message. I wasn't going to stay optional. Not anymore. I was about to become unforgettable. The next morning, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open between us. I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that text message, "Don't come." But I wasn't sad anymore. I was something else entirely, determined. Daniel had already been searching. When I came downstairs at 6 a.m., he had a list of luxury resorts pulled up on his phone. "If we're going to do this," he said, "we're going to do it right." We found Valley Ridge Estate around 7:30. The photos looked like something from a magazine I'd never be featured in. A sprawling villa in the Colorado mountains, floor-to-ceiling windows framing snow-covered peaks, a stone fireplace you could walk inside, heated marble floors, a chef's kitchen with appliances I didn't know the names for. The bedrooms had views that made you forget winter could be harsh. Everything about it whispered luxury, the kind of place I'd scroll past quickly because that money could always go somewhere more practical, somewhere that benefited Robert. The price appeared at the bottom of the page, $52,000 for the week of Christmas. My hand froze on the mouse. $52,000 for 1 week. That was more than Daniel and I had spent on vacations in our entire marriage combined. That was the cost of a reliable car. That was a year of Robert's college tuition back when he'd attended. That was money that could go to Jacob's education fund, that could help with whatever financial crisis would inevitably arrive next from my son, who never said thank you, but always needed more. Daniel and I aren't wealthy. We're comfortable. Daniel worked as an engineer for 40 years, steady work that paid well, but not extravagantly. I taught elementary school for 35 years before retiring. We saved carefully, invested conservatively, lived below our means so we'd have security in our old age. We'd helped Robert countless times: the college tuition shortfalls, the car repairs, the wedding we paid for even though Emily's parents offered to split it and we couldn't really afford our half, the $35,000 just 4 months ago that was supposed to be our trip to Ireland. This $52,000 was supposed to be for emergencies, medical bills, home repairs, the kind of catastrophes you can't predict. But sitting there looking at that villa, I realized this was an emergency. Just a different kind. I stared at the "Book Now" button. My cursor hovered over it. My hand was shaking. Not from age, from fear. What if Robert called to apologize? What if he said the text had been Emily's idea and he'd gone along with it but he regretted it? What if booking this villa made everything worse, burned a bridge I might still be able to cross? What if I spent $52,000 on 1 week and had nothing to show for it but more family division? My mother's voice echoed in my head, the lessons she'd taught me about being a good woman. Don't be selfish. Put family first. Sacrifice is what mothers do. Want less, need less, take up less space. I'd lived 70 years by those rules. 70 years of making myself smaller so other people could be comfortable. And where had it gotten me? Uninvited from Christmas. My hand stayed frozen on the mouse. I couldn't click. I couldn't not click. I was paralyzed between the woman I'd always been and the woman I was terrified to become. Daniel's hand covered mine on the mouse. Not pushing, not forcing, just resting there, warm and steady. He looked at me with eyes that had seen me through 47 years of marriage, through raising Robert, through every compromise I'd made and every piece of myself I'd given away. "You've spent your whole life waiting for permission, Ellie," he said quietly. "From your parents when you were young. From Adam now that you're older. From everyone in between. You ask permission to take up space. You apologize for having needs. You shrink yourself to fit into whatever box someone else has built for you." He paused, making sure I was really hearing him. "What if just this once, you didn't? What if you just decided what you wanted and took it without asking if it was okay?" I looked at my husband and felt something crack open in my chest. Not breaking, opening. He was right. I'd spent 70 years seeking approval for my own life, asking my parents if it was okay to marry Daniel instead of the lawyer they'd preferred, asking Robert if it was okay to visit, to call, to love my grandson, asking permission to exist in spaces I had every right to occupy. I clicked the button, "Book Now." The screen changed, payment details. I entered our credit card information with hands that had stopped shaking. Confirmation page. I clicked again. The confirmation email arrived 30 seconds later. Booking confirmed. Valley Ridge Estate. December 20th through December 27th. $52,000 charged to the card we'd been using to carefully accumulate travel points we never actually used for travel. And with that email came a feeling I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. Not guilt. Not anxiety about whether I'd made the right choice. Not worry about what Robert would think. Just a pure, clean sense of taking up space in my own life. Of mattering. Of choosing myself without apology. December 5th, 2024. That was the day I stopped waiting for permission to live. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange blur. I moved through the Christmas preparations I'd already started, but everything felt different now. The gifts I'd bought for Jacob stayed wrapped, but I didn't look at them with sadness. I looked at them with clarity. I'd chosen those gifts carefully, spent hours finding exactly the right things. They'd probably be rejected like the science kit, deemed inappropriate by Emily's standards I could never predict or meet. Daniel and I started planning our week instead. Not quietly, not apologetically, but with genuine excitement. I called my friend Susan first. Susan had been telling me for 3 years that I needed to stand up for myself, that Robert's treatment of me wasn't normal or acceptable, that I deserved better. I'd always defended Robert to her, made excuses, changed the subject. This time I didn't. "Susan, Daniel and I are spending Christmas at a luxury resort in Colorado," I said, the words still feeling foreign in my mouth, like I was speaking a language I'd never been taught. "We've booked this incredible villa. Would you and Tom want to join us?" The silence on the other end lasted just long enough for my old instincts to kick in. I started to panic, to think I'd been presumptuous, to prepare an apology for assuming they'd want to spend Christmas with us. Then Susan laughed, a delighted, genuine sound that made my eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Are you serious? We'd absolutely love to. What on earth finally made you do something for yourself?" I told her about the text message, about being uninvited from Christmas. I waited for the sympathy, the shocked reassurances that Robert didn't mean it, the suggestions for how I could fix this misunderstanding. Instead, Susan said something I didn't expect. "Good for you for not accepting that. Not I'm sorry, not how terrible, not you must be devastated. Good for you." Like my decision to choose myself was something to celebrate rather than something to apologize for. I called 3 more friends that day. Martha, my neighbor who'd brought me meals every day for 2 weeks after my knee surgery last year, who'd never once made me feel like helping was a burden. Patricia, from my book club, who actually listened when I talked instead of waiting for her turn to speak. David, one of Daniel's former mentees, who'd gone on to build a successful career and still called Daniel every few months just to say thank you and catch up. Every single person said yes immediately. They all sounded genuinely excited, thrilled to be included. Nobody asked what they should bring, or whether their dietary restrictions would be accommodated, or whether I was sure I wanted to host, or if this was too much trouble. They just said yes and thank you, and when do we leave, and what can we do to help. This, I realized, was what it felt like to be wanted. Not tolerated, not accommodated, wanted. The difference was so stark, it made me understand just how long I'd been accepting crumbs and calling it a feast. I bought a new dress. Not new to me, actually. I'd bought it 3 years ago for Robert and Emily's Christmas party, the one they threw for their friends and colleagues. It was turquoise cashmere, soft as a whisper, elegant without being showy. I'd been so excited to wear it. Then Emily had texted the day before the party. "Hey Margaret, just wanted to give you a heads up that we're keeping things super casual this year. Jeans and sweaters. You might feel overdressed if you wear anything fancy." I'd worn black slacks and a cardigan instead. The turquoise dress had hung in my closet for 3 years with the tags still on, a reminder of excitement turned to shame. I pulled it out now, tried it on. It fit perfectly. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because I'd changed physically, but because the expression on my face was unfamiliar. I looked happy. Genuinely, undeniably happy. Not the performance of happiness I'd mastered over years of pretending Robert's neglect didn't hurt. Real happiness. Daniel and I arranged everything else. A caterer who specialized in luxury events, a string quartet for Christmas Eve, decorations that would make the villa look like something from a winter dream, elegant and warm without being excessive. We told no one in Robert's family. Not because I was hiding or trying to punish anyone, but because it genuinely didn't occur to me that I needed their permission or knowledge. I was done running my decisions through the filter of what Robert might think, how Emily might judge, whether my choices would cause some unnamed inconvenience. On December 20th, Daniel and I loaded our car and started the drive to Colorado. We left early, before sunrise, the world still dark and quiet. As we pulled out of our driveway, I looked back at our house. The Christmas tree was still visible through the living room window, lights on a timer, the crooked angel watching over an empty room. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. The drive took most of the day. We arrived at Valley Ridge Estate just as the sun was setting, the sky turning shades of pink and gold behind the mountains. When we pulled up the long, winding driveway, I stopped breathing. The photos hadn't lied. If anything, they hadn't captured how extraordinary this place was. The villa was enormous, All wood and stone and glass, windows that reflected the sunset like they were made of light. There were lanterns lining the driveway, already lit even though we'd arrived earlier than expected. Someone had been watching for us. A staff member opened my car door before I could reach for the handle. "Welcome to Valley Ridge Estate, Mrs. Patterson," she said, smiling like she meant it. "We're so glad you're here." I stepped out of the car, and the cold air hit my face, sharp and clean, smelling like pine and wood smoke and snow. My legs felt unsteady. Not from the drive, from the surreal feeling of being somewhere I'd never imagined I deserved to be. Daniel came around the car and took my hand. Together we walked to the front door. It opened before we reached it. Another staff member, welcoming, warm, treating us like we mattered. The interior was somehow more beautiful than the photos. Cathedral ceilings with exposed beams, a fireplace made of river stone, already lit, flames dancing, and windows, an entire wall of glass looking out at mountains that seemed close enough to touch. I walked to those windows and just stood there. The view was absurd in its perfection. Snow-covered peaks turning pink in the sunset, pine trees so dense and dark they looked black, sky so clear I could already see the first stars appearing. I touched the glass, and it was cold under my fingers. Real, not a dream. "Ellie," Daniel said softly behind me. I turned. He was smiling, really smiling, the way he used to before Robert's needs became the organizing principle of our lives. "This is ours," he said. "For 1 week, this is ours." I felt tears slide down my face, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that come when you let yourself feel something you've been holding back for too long. Relief, joy, the permission to take up space. That night, alone in the villa before our friends arrived, I did something I hadn't planned. I pulled out my phone and opened a new text message. To Robert. I started typing. "Hi, honey. I wanted to let you know." 6 words. I got 6 words in and stopped. I stared at what I'd written. What was I doing? I was about to tell Robert where I was, about the villa, about how I'd decided to spend Christmas. And underneath that explanation, I knew exactly what I was really doing. I was apologizing for daring to have plans that didn't include him, for spending money on myself instead of saving it for his next crisis, for choosing joy without his approval, for existing in a way that might make him uncomfortable. I was about to shrink myself again, make myself small and apologetic and easy to dismiss. My finger hovered over the send button. All my old instincts screamed at me to explain, to justify, to seek permission retroactively if I couldn't seek it in advance. Then I thought about that text message. Don't come. 2 words that had required no explanation, no justification, no apology. Robert hadn't worried about my feelings when he'd uninvited me from Christmas. He hadn't asked if it was okay or considered whether it might hurt. He'd just decided what he wanted and informed me of his decision. I deleted the message. All 6 words, watched them disappear letter by letter, and something inside me shifted, not broke, shifted, like a bone that had been out of place for years, finally settling where it belonged. I wasn't going to apologize for choosing myself. Not to Robert. Not to anyone. I put my phone away and didn't pick it up again that night. Our friends started arriving the next day. Susan and Tom first, pulling up in the early afternoon with suitcases and wine and excitement that felt infectious. Susan hugged me so hard I lost my breath. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered in my ear. "Not I'm sorry about Robert. Not what a terrible situation. I'm proud of you." Martha and her husband Jim came next, then Patricia, then David and his wife Caroline, then the Johnsons from church, Bill and Sandra, who had always asked how I was doing and actually waited to hear the answer, instead of treating it as a formality. By evening, the villa was full of voices and laughter, the kind of easy conversation that flows when people genuinely enjoy each other's company. Nobody was performing. Nobody was managing anyone else's expectations. We were just present, together, happy to be exactly where we were. That night, Daniel and I decorated the villa with our friends helping. We kept it simple but elegant. White lights wrapped around the stair railings, garlands of real pine on the mantel, gold candles on every surface. It looked magical, like something from a movie about people whose lives were uncomplicated and full of warmth. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I woke up early and stood at those enormous windows watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the snow pink and orange and gold. This was my Christmas. Not the one I'd planned for months. Not the one where I'd watch Jacob open presents and try to find moments to connect with my son. This Christmas belonged to me. I spent the morning helping the caterers set up, arranging the table with white linens and gold chargers, making sure every detail was exactly right. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, because I wanted it to be beautiful. Because I deserved beautiful things. At 4 p.m, I went upstairs and put on the turquoise cashmere dress. It slid over my skin like water, soft and perfect. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman I'd forgotten existed. Confident, joyful, worthy. Daniel came into the bedroom while I was clasping my necklace. He stopped in the doorway and just stared. "Ellie," he said. And the way he said my name made me feel like I was 30 years old again. Like I was beautiful. Like I mattered. "You're stunning." I smiled at him. A real smile. "I should have worn this 3 years ago," I said. "Emily was wrong. I wouldn't have been overdressed. I would have been perfect." The dinner that night was everything I'd imagined Christmas could be but never was. The table looked like something from a magazine. The food was extraordinary. Lobster tails and perfectly cooked filet mignon and roasted vegetables that tasted like they'd been harvested that morning, and scalloped potatoes so rich they should have been illegal. The string quartet played in the corner, filling the enormous room with music that made everything feel sacred. We ate slowly, talking and laughing, nobody rushing, nobody checking phones, nobody performing gratitude they didn't feel. This was real, all of it. The joy was real. The connection was real. The warmth was real. Halfway through dinner, Martha stood up with her wine glass raised. The quartet paused. Everyone got quiet. "I want to make a toast," Martha said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "To Margaret and Daniel, thank you for this. For your generosity, for your warmth, for reminding all of us what Christmas is supposed to feel like. Not obligatory, not stressful, just full of love." Everyone raised their glasses. I felt tears slide down my face again, and I didn't try to hide them. Because Martha was right. This was what Christmas was supposed to feel like. In that moment, sitting at that beautiful table surrounded by people who valued me, I understood something I'd been refusing to see for years. I'd been pouring warmth into people who treated it like an inconvenience. Robert and Emily had received my love, my time, my money, my effort, and responded with tolerance at best, rejection at worst. Meanwhile, people like Martha and Susan and the others at this table, people who actually appreciated warmth and reciprocated it, I'd barely made time for. I'd been so focused on trying to matter to the people who didn't want me that I'd neglected the people who did. After dinner, the quartet kept playing, and someone suggested dancing. Daniel took my hand and led me to the open space near the windows. We swayed slowly to a waltz I didn't know the name of, the mountains dark behind the glass, the room golden with candlelight. I rested my head on his shoulder and felt peaceful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Around us, our friends danced and talked and laughed. Someone was taking pictures. I noticed peripherally, phones coming out, cameras pointing at the decorations and the food and the quartet. I didn't think much of it. People take pictures at celebrations. That's what you do when moments feel special enough to preserve. Susan posted something to Facebook while I was dancing. I didn't know it then. I was too busy living to document. Patricia shared something to Instagram. A video of the quartet playing with the mountain view behind them, the windows reflecting candlelight and Christmas lights. David posted a photo of the table before we'd eaten, everything arranged perfectly, and he tagged the location, Valley Ridge Estate, Colorado. Martha added a picture of me in my turquoise dress, standing by the fireplace, genuinely smiling. She captioned it something simple, "Most beautiful Christmas I've ever seen." People started commenting immediately. Friends from church, former students of mine who were adults now with children of their own. Neighbors from our street, old colleagues of Daniel's. "Ellen, you look radiant. Is that Valley Ridge? That place is incredible. Living your best life, Mrs. Patterson." The posts spread the way things do on social media, shared and liked and commented on. By 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve, over 300 people had seen some version of our celebration. Former students tagged other former students. Church friends shared to their own pages. The photos multiplied, reaching people I'd nearly forgotten, people who remembered me fondly, people who thought I deserved joy. I didn't know any of this was happening. I wasn't on my phone. I was present, fully present, for the first time in longer than I could remember. At midnight, our friends started heading to their rooms. Hugs good night. Thank yous that sounded sincere. Tomorrow we'd do Christmas morning together, a relaxed brunch, gifts exchanged not out of obligation but genuine affection. Daniel and I were the last ones in the main room. We stood at those enormous windows, looking out at the mountains under a sky so full of stars it looked fake. "Merry Christmas, Ellie," Daniel said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against him. "Merry Christmas," I whispered. For the first time in years, I meant it. What I didn't know, standing there in that peaceful moment, was that my son had seen the photos. Robert, who had uninvited me from Christmas, who hadn't called in weeks, who couldn't remember to say thank you, had been scrolling through Facebook at 11:43 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Unable to sleep, probably stressed about whatever had made him decide my presence would ruin his peaceful holiday. He'd been killing time on social media, and he'd seen Susan's post, his mother in a turquoise dress he'd never seen, standing in a luxury villa he didn't know existed, surrounded by people who looked genuinely happy to be with her, looking more joyful than he'd seen me look in years. He'd clicked on the location tag, Valley Ridge Estate. He'd Googled it, seen the price, $52,000 for a week. The same parents he'd texted, "Don't come to," had spent $52,000 on a Christmas that didn't include him. The same mother who always helped when he needed money, who'd given him $35,000 just 4 months ago, had decided she was worth this kind of extravagance. I'd chosen myself, and Robert had seen it. That's when his phone calls started. 11:47 p.m. The first one. I didn't hear it. My phone was upstairs in my bedroom, charging, forgotten. I was downstairs with Daniel, peaceful and present, and completely unaware that my son's panic was beginning. But before I tell you about those 73 calls, about what they revealed and what they cost, you need to understand what Robert had been hiding. Because my son's desperation wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. It was about money. It was always about money. And what I was about to discover would change everything I thought I understood about why he'd uninvited me from Christmas in the first place. I woke up at 6:30 on Christmas morning to the sound of buzzing. Not the gentle alarm I'd set. Something more insistent, more desperate. Before I'd even opened my eyes fully, before I'd registered where I was or remembered the magical evening before, my phone was vibrating on the nightstand. Over and over. I reached for it instinctively, thinking something must be wrong. An emergency. Someone hurt. The screen lit up my face in the dim room. 12 missed calls. All from Robert. I blinked at the screen, confused. 12 calls. Since when did Robert call me 12 times for anything? I unlocked the phone and the full picture emerged. Not 12 calls. The notification had only shown the most recent 12. The actual number was climbing as I watched, another call coming through right then. Robert. I didn't answer. I scrolled through the call log instead, my heart starting to pound but not with worry, with recognition. With the cold understanding of exactly what this was. The calls had started at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. While I'd been downstairs listening to the quartet play Silent Night, while I'd been feeling peace for the first time in months, my son had been frantically dialing my number. 11:47 p.m., 11:52 p.m., 12:03 a.m. Christmas Day now. 12:15 a.m., 12:20 a.m., 12:33 a.m. They kept coming. Every few minutes throughout the night. Some spaced 10 minutes apart, others just 3 or 4, like he'd call, wait briefly, lose patience, and call again. By the time I was fully awake and sitting up in that luxurious bed with morning light streaming through windows that framed snow-covered mountains, there were 73 missed calls. 73. I'd never received 73 calls from Robert in an entire year, let alone in one night. Not on my birthday, not on Mother's Day, not during the week after Daniel's heart surgery 2 years ago, when I could have used some support, but now, on Christmas morning, after he'd uninvited me from his celebration, my phone was full of his desperation. And here's what struck me as I sat there looking at that call log. Not one of those calls had come with a text message saying, "Merry Christmas, Mom." Not one voicemail started with, "I hope you're having a good morning." This wasn't a son worried about his mother's safety or well-being. This was something else entirely. I got out of bed and put on the soft robe the villa had provided, thick and warm and more expensive than anything I owned at home. I went downstairs to the kitchen where coffee was already brewing, some automated system that had been programmed to start at 6:30. I poured myself a cup and sat in one of the armchairs by those enormous windows. The mountains were pink with sunrise. Everything was quiet, peaceful. Then the phone started buzzing again. "Robert, call number 74. I let it go to voicemail. Daniel came down a few minutes later, saw me sitting there with my phone face down on the side table, and understood immediately. "How many?" he asked quietly. 73 when I woke up," I said. 74 now." Daniel poured his own coffee and sat in the chair beside mine. He didn't tell me to call Robert back. He didn't suggest this must be an emergency. He just sat with me. After a few minutes of silence, I picked up the phone. Not to call back. To listen. There were voicemails. I didn't want to listen to all 74. I couldn't. But I needed to understand what this was. I put the phone on speaker so Daniel could hear. I started with the first one. The timestamp showed 11:52 p.m., Christmas Eve. Robert's voice came through tense and confused. "Mom, hey, I saw some photos online. Are you at Valley Ridge? That place is like, call me back." That was it. 5 days since he'd texted me, "Don't come," and he hadn't called once. Hadn't checked if I was okay. Hadn't wished me Merry Christmas. But he'd seen photos of where I was spending Christmas, and suddenly he needed to talk. No apology in his voice. No, "I hope you're having a good time," or "You look happy in those pictures." Just confusion and the expectation that I'd call him back immediately. I skipped ahead to the fourth voicemail. 12:20 a.m., Christmas Day. His voice was more urgent now. "Mom, seriously, where are you? Is that really where you're staying? Why didn't you tell us you were going away? We need to talk. We need to talk." I repeated those words out loud after the voicemail ended. Not, "I'm sorry for how I treated you." Not, "I made a mistake with that text message." We need to talk, as if I owed him an explanation for my life, as if I'd been required to inform him of my Christmas plans after he'd explicitly uninvited me from his. Daniel's hand found mine, squeezed. I scrolled further. Voicemail number 12, sent at 2:47 a.m. Robert's voice was different now, breaking slightly. Desperate. "Mom, please. I know what I said came out wrong. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Just call me, please." Came out wrong. I sat with that phrase. "Don't come" was pretty straightforward. 2 words, hard to misinterpret. But now that he'd seen where I actually was, how I'd actually spent Christmas, suddenly his clear directive had come out wrong. I looked at Daniel. His face was hard, not angry, resolved. He'd heard the same thing I had. Robert wasn't apologizing for hurting me. He was trying to manage me, trying to reframe his rejection as a misunderstanding so he could get whatever he wanted now. I skipped ahead again. Voicemail 31, 6:15 a.m., Christmas morning. Robert's voice had changed again. The desperation was gone. Now he just sounded angry. "Are you seriously ignoring me right now? On Christmas? After everything we've been through? Fine. I get it. You made your point." I set the phone down on the side table, stared at it like it was something toxic. Daniel spoke quietly. "He doesn't think he did anything wrong." I nodded. "He thinks I'm punishing him." "Are you?" Daniel asked. "I thought about that. Was I punishing Robert by not answering? By spending Christmas somewhere beautiful without telling him? By choosing myself for once in 70 years? No, I said finally. I'm just not saving him anymore. I didn't listen to the rest of the voicemails. I didn't need to. The pattern was clear. Confusion that I had a life beyond him, urgency that I wasn't immediately available, attempts to reframe his cruelty as a miscommunication, and finally, anger that I wasn't playing my assigned role. I opened my text messages instead. There were several, most from Robert, variations on the voicemails. Call me. Where are you? We need to talk. But one was from Emily, sent at 7:43 a.m., just an hour ago. I opened it. The message was long. I read it slowly. Daniel, reading over my shoulder. We saw the pictures. Beautiful place. Hope you're enjoying yourself. Jacob misses you. That was the opening. Polite. Surface level. Designed to make me feel guilty. Then the real message. Would love to talk soon. Maybe clear the air. Clear the air. As if the problem was misunderstanding rather than disrespect. And then the final paragraph. The reason for all 73 calls. Also, we're in a tough spot financially. The bank called again about the second mortgage. If there's any way you could help, we'd be so grateful. I read that last part 3 times. The silence in that beautiful room was absolute. Outside, the mountains were fully lit now, the sun climbing, the sky turning from pink to blue. Inside, I felt something settle. Not surprise. Certainty. There it was. 73 calls. Not because Robert missed me. Not because he regretted uninviting me from Christmas. Not because he'd realized his mother deserved better treatment. He'd called 73 times because he needed money. And the photos of me at Valley Ridge had shown him that I had money to spend. $52,000 on a week at a luxury villa. Money I could have given him instead. Money I'd chosen to spend on myself. That's what the calls were about. That's what they'd always been about. I thought back over the years. Every time Robert called, every time he reached out, there was a need attached. Tuition shortfall, car repair, down payment, baby expenses. I'd been the bank of mom. Open 24 hours, no questions asked, no gratitude required. And I'd told myself that was love. That's what mothers did. You gave without expecting anything in return. But this, sitting in that armchair on Christmas morning reading Emily's text message, I finally understood the difference. Giving without expecting gratitude is one thing. Being valued only for what you can give is something else entirely. For 42 years, I'd been available whenever Robert needed me. And when he didn't need me, I disappeared from his life until the next crisis. The baby blanket I'd spent 6 weeks knitting had been worth less than a store-bought organic one. The cookies I'd baked from scratch weren't as important as Emily's dietary philosophy. The $35,000 I'd given him 4 months ago hadn't warranted a phone call, just a 2-word text. But now, seeing that I'd spent $52,000 on myself, suddenly I was worth 73 calls in one night. I looked at Daniel. They're going to lose the house, I said quietly. He nodded. Probably. They think we should save them. They do. Should we? I asked. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I needed to hear it out loud. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That depends. Do you want to be his mother? Or his bank?" The question sat between us like something physical. I'd spent 70 years believing those two things were the same. That being a good mother meant solving every problem, funding every need, being available for every crisis. But Robert had taught me differently. He'd shown me exactly what happened when you let someone take without giving. They don't learn gratitude. They learn entitlement. I want to be his mother, I said finally. Then maybe it's time he learned what mothers actually deserve, Daniel replied. I picked up my phone, opened a new text message to Robert, typed carefully. I'm spending Christmas with friends. I'll be home on the 27th. If you want to talk, we can meet then. Not at your house. Not at mine. Somewhere neutral. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. The response came within seconds. Mom, this can't wait. We're in serious trouble. Can you please just call me? I typed back. The 27th. Take it or leave it. I turned off my phone, completely off. Not just silenced. Off. Daniel smiled. Merry Christmas, Ellie. For the first time in my life, I'd set a boundary with my son, and it felt like freedom. 5 days later, Daniel and I drove back from Colorado. The villa had been everything I'd needed it to be. Space to breathe, space to understand, space to become someone who didn't apologize for existing. We got home late on the 27th, unpacked, slept in our own bed. The next morning, I texted Robert. There's a cafe on Maple Street, tomorrow at 10. We can talk then. He agreed immediately. Too quickly. The desperation was obvious. Daniel and I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. It was a small place, local, vintage furniture and bookshelves, and the kind of atmosphere that made confrontation feel impossible. That's why I'd chosen it. I needed Robert to stay calm. I needed to stay calm. We sat in a corner booth, ordered coffee, waited. Robert arrived 10 minutes late, which was typical. What wasn't typical was how he looked, disheveled, hair uncombed, coat too thin for the weather. He'd always been meticulous about appearance. This version of my son looked desperate. He sat down across from us without greeting. No hug, no Merry Christmas, even though we hadn't seen each other for the holiday. He just launched in immediately, defensive and urgent. I don't understand what the big deal is, he said, voice tight. We just wanted a quiet Christmas with the kids. That's all. It wasn't personal. I said nothing, just looked at him, watched him fidget under my gaze. And then you just disappear to some luxury resort without even telling us? He continued, his voice rising slightly. How were we supposed to know where you were? We were worried. Daniel spoke then, his voice calm and firm. You weren't invited to know. Robert blinked. What? You uninvited us from Christmas, Daniel said. We weren't part of your plans. You made that clear, so we made our own plans. We didn't need your permission. Robert scoffed, but it sounded forced. Come on, Dad. You know what I meant. We just needed space. From all the family pressure, from everyone wanting time with Jacob, Emily's parents, your side, it's just a lot. I spoke for the first time since he'd sat down. My voice was quiet, but I made sure every word was clear. Space from what, Robert? He hesitated. He hadn't expected me to challenge him. From the pressure, he repeated. The expectations. When was the last time we asked for time with Jacob? I asked. Silence. Robert looked away. I'll tell you, I continued. September. I offered to take him to the park. You said no. July. I invited you all for dinner. You canceled. May. I sent Jacob a birthday gift. You never acknowledged it. March. I asked if I could video call with him. You said another time. I paused, let each example land. So tell me, Robert, what pressure, what expectations? Because from where I'm sitting, the only expectation you had of me was to be available when you needed something. His face changed, caught, cornered. He switched tactics quickly, his voice softening, trying for vulnerability. Look, Mom, I know I screwed up. The text was harsh. I'm sorry. Really. There it was, the apology I'd been waiting for, but it felt hollow, timed, strategic. But we're in real trouble here, he continued, voice breaking slightly. The mortgage, the credit cards. Emily's parents can't help anymore. We might actually lose the house. He looked at me with eyes that expected sympathy, expected rescue. I'm asking for help, he said. Isn't that what family does? The question hung in the air. Isn't that what family does? Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, slid it across the table. Robert stared at it, then picked it up, opened it. Inside were business cards for financial advisors, worksheets for creating a budget, contact information for credit counseling services, resources, information, help, just not the kind Robert wanted. This isn't. Robert started, staring at the papers. You're not going to. Give you money? I finished for him. No. His face went red. Are you kidding me right now? His voice rose, and other patrons in the cafe glanced over. You just spent $50,000 on a vacation, and you won't help your own son keep his house? I kept my voice level, calm, powerful in a way I'd never felt before. I spent $52,000 on people who value me, on people who say thank you, on people who don't uninvite me from Christmas and then call 73 times when they need a bailout. Robert stood up, his chair scraping loudly. This is unbelievable. Emily was right. You only care about yourselves. Daniel stood too. Not aggressive, just solid. Calm authority. Sit down, Robert. Something in Daniel's voice made Robert hesitate. Then sit. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Your mother gave you everything. Time, money, love, sacrifice. She's been there for every crisis, every need, every emergency. She's never said no to you. Not once. He paused. And you gave her a text message that said, "Don't come." The silence was devastating. You didn't lose your mother when the bank came calling, Daniel continued. You lost her when you told her she wasn't welcome. Robert's face cycled through emotions. Shame, anger, denial. I stood, putting my coat on slowly. You can fix your financial problems, Robert. There are ways. People lose houses and survive. You'll figure it out. I looked at my son. This man I'd raised. This person I'd loved unconditionally for 42 years. But you can't fix this until you realize what you actually did. I walked toward the door. Daniel followed. Behind us, Robert called out, desperate. So that's it? You're just done? I turned back. One last look. No, honey, I said quietly. You were done with me first. I just finally accepted it. We walked out. The bell above the door chimed. Outside, snow was starting to fall, light flakes that caught the morning sun. Daniel took my hand as we walked to the car. I felt strange, not triumphant, not sad, just clear. For the first time in my life, I'd told my son the truth. I'd set a boundary that had nothing to do with punishment and everything to do with self-respect. I didn't know if Robert would understand. I didn't know if he'd ever apologize for real, or if this would be the permanent shape of our relationship going forward. But I knew something I hadn't known before. I knew my worth, and I knew it wasn't measured by how much I could give to people who didn't appreciate it. We drove home in silence. It wasn't the heavy silence of regret. It was the peaceful silence of hard things done right. Whatever came next, I would face it as someone who'd finally learned the difference between love and enabling. Between being a mother and being a doormat. Robert would have to figure out his financial crisis on his own. And I would have to figure out how to be his mother without losing myself. For the first time in 70 years, I was choosing myself, and it felt like the most loving thing I'd ever done. A week after that cafe confrontation, I received a letter, not an email, not a text, an actual letter, handwritten, Robert's familiar scrawl on the envelope. Daniel and I had extended our stay at Valley Ridge for another week, not because we were running from anything, but because we'd finally found something worth staying for. Peace. The letter was forwarded from our home address. I held it for a long time before opening it, sitting in that same armchair by the windows, mountains spread out before me like a promise. I knew what it would say before I read a single word. I'd known Robert for 42 years. I understood exactly how his mind worked when confronted with consequences. He would reframe. He would deflect. He would make himself the victim of my unreasonableness. I opened the envelope slowly, unfolded the pages. His handwriting was rushed, angry in its slant. I read it once, carefully, letting each word register without emotional reaction. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. I'm not sure I agree with everything, but I understand you're hurt. Not sure he agreed, as if my feelings were an opinion he could debate rather than a reality he'd created. I kept reading. Emily thinks we should take some space. I think that's probably best. Emily thinks. Not I think. He was already distributing responsibility, making sure I knew this distance was a mutual decision, not a consequence of his actions. The kids ask about you sometimes. I don't know what to tell them. The kids, plural. He meant Jacob, but using kids made it sound like multiple children were suffering from my absence, increased the guilt he was trying to create. And that phrase, "I don't know what to tell them," was designed to make me feel responsible for his discomfort. As if I should solve the problem of explaining to Jacob why Grandma wasn't around, when Robert was the one who'd created that absence. Maybe one day we can fix this, but right now I'm angry too. Angry, too. As if we were both equally wronged. As if his anger at being held accountable was equivalent to my hurt at being dismissed and used. There was no real apology in the entire letter. No acknowledgement of what he'd actually done. No understanding of why I'd drawn boundaries. Just blame wrapped carefully in hurt feelings, designed to make me feel guilty enough to break. I folded the letter and walked to the bedroom. Opened the drawer of the nightstand and placed it inside, underneath the hotel notepad and pen. Out of sight, not torn up, not dramatically destroyed, just filed away as information that no longer controlled me. I walked back to those enormous windows and looked out at the mountains. The sun was setting, turning everything pink and gold. I realized something standing there. I didn't need Robert to understand what he'd done. I didn't need his permission to move on. I didn't need him to validate my feelings or acknowledge my worth. I just needed to stop waiting for him to see me. For 70 years, I'd waited to be seen. By my parents, who'd loved me but never quite approved of my choices. By Robert, who'd needed me but never valued me. By everyone I'd given pieces of myself to, hoping they'd recognize the gift and treasure it. But being seen isn't something you can earn from people who are determined to look away. And I was done performing for an audience that had left the theater. I was done waiting. 2 months later, back home in February, something unexpected happened. I was going through the mail on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of mundane day where nothing significant is supposed to occur. Bills, catalogs, a postcard from Susan and Tom, who were visiting their daughter in Arizona. Then my phone dinged with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But something made me open it. The message was long. I read it slowly, my heart starting to pound. "Hi, Grandma, this is Claire. I got your number from Aunt Susan. I'm 17 now. I know things are weird with Dad right now. But I miss you. Can I visit this summer? Just me. I want to hear your side. Love, Claire." Claire, Robert's daughter from his first marriage. I hadn't seen her in over 3 years, not since Robert and his ex-wife had one of their bitter arguments about custody and decided the easiest solution was to limit extended family contact. Claire had been 14 the last time I'd seen her. Quiet and thoughtful, with Robert's eyes, but none of his entitlement. We'd only met a handful of times before everything got complicated, before Robert's divorce turned ugly, before I became collateral damage in someone else's war. But she remembered me. After 3 years of silence, after whatever version of events Robert had probably told her, after all the reasons she could have had to forget I existed, she'd tracked down my number and reached out. My hands were shaking, not from fear or sadness, from hope. That unfamiliar, dangerous feeling I'd trained myself not to trust. I read the message again. "I want to hear your side." She knew there were multiple sides. She knew the situation with her father was complicated, and she was brave enough to reach across that complication to find me. I started typing a response. "Claire, I'd love to see you. Of course you can visit." I deleted it. Too casual. Not enough emotion. I tried again. "Sweetheart, you have no idea how much this means to me." Delete. Too intense. Might scare her off. I must have typed and deleted 5 different responses before I finally settled on the truth. Simple and clear. "Yes, sweetheart. Always yes." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Her response came 3 minutes later. A heart emoji and "can't wait." 3 words that meant more to me than 73 phone calls from her father ever could. Claire arrived in July. I picked her up from the bus station, barely recognizing the young woman who got off carrying a backpack and wearing the kind of confidence I hadn't possessed until I was 70 years old. She was 17 now, almost an adult, with long dark hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen more than most teenagers should have to. We hugged in the parking lot, and I felt something in my chest crack open. Not breaking. Opening. Like a door I'd thought was locked, discovering it had been open all along. We spent 2 weeks together, not doing anything extraordinary. Cooking meals, watching old movies, going through photo albums I hadn't looked at in years. Claire asked questions about Robert growing up. What was he like as a kid? When did he change? Did I see this coming? I answered honestly, but without bitterness. I told her about the little boy who used to bring me drawings from school, who cried when I was sick, who once saved his allowance for 3 months to buy me flowers for Mother's Day. I also told her about the man he'd become, the one who stopped saying thank you, who valued me only for what I could provide, who'd uninvited me from Christmas. Claire listened to all of it. She didn't defend her father. She didn't make excuses. She just listened with the kind of attention that made me understand she was trying to piece together her own understanding of who Robert was. One afternoon, sitting on my back porch drinking lemonade, Claire started crying. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that slid down her face while she stared at the garden. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" I asked. "For not making me choose," she said. "Dad told me you and he weren't speaking. He said it was complicated. He made it sound like I'd have to pick sides if I reached out to you." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But you didn't do that. You didn't tell me I had to choose between you and him. You just said yes." I reached over and took her hand. "You never have to choose love, honey. Love isn't supposed to be a choice between people. Real love makes space. It doesn't demand exclusivity." She squeezed my hand. "I wish Dad understood that. Maybe someday he will," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Claire stayed for 2 weeks, and in that time she learned things I wished I'd learned at 17 instead of 70. She learned about boundaries, how they're not walls built to keep people out but guidelines for how you deserve to be treated. She learned about self-respect, how it's not selfish to protect your peace. She learned that love without reciprocity isn't sustainable, that you can't pour from an empty cup, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling someone's worst behavior. And I learned something too. I learned that the legacy we leave isn't always with the people we expect. Sometimes it's with the ones brave enough to reach across silence and complicated family dynamics to find connection. Sometimes it's with the next generation who's watching how we handle being hurt and learning what's acceptable. When I drove Claire back to the bus station at the end of her visit, she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "I love you, Grandma," she said. "I'm coming back next summer if that's okay. Always," I told her. "You're always welcome here." I watched her bus pull away, standing in that parking lot long after it disappeared, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope for the future. Not with Robert. That door was closed for now, maybe forever. But with Claire, with the young woman who'd chosen connection over convenience, who'd been brave enough to seek her own truth instead of accepting someone else's narrative. When December came around again, Daniel and I went back to Valley Ridge. Not to prove anything, not to send a message, not to show Robert what he was missing. We went because it had become ours, because we'd found something there that first Christmas, something we wanted to preserve and build on. We invited the same friends from the year before. Susan and Tom, Martha and Jim, Patricia, David and Caroline, the Johnsons, all the people who'd shown up for us when we needed community. But we also invited new people, former students of mine who'd stayed in touch over the years, colleagues of Daniel's who'd become friends, neighbors we'd known for decades but never made time for because we were always saving our energy for Robert. And we invited Claire. She flew in 2 days before Christmas, grinning when she saw the villa, immediately claiming a bedroom with a view of the mountains. "This place is insane," she said, spinning around the main room with her arms out. "You guys are living your best life." "We're living our real life," I corrected. Finally, Christmas Eve, we had the same celebration as the year before. Beautiful table, extraordinary food, string quartet filling the villa with music. Everyone dressed up, laughing, genuinely happy to be together. But this year felt different. Last year had been about escape, about claiming space for myself after a lifetime of shrinking. This year was about celebration, about the community I'd built, the connections I'd nurtured, the life I was actively creating instead of waiting for permission to live. Halfway through dinner, Claire stood up with her glass raised. The quartet paused. Everyone got quiet. "I want to make a toast," she said. and her voice was steady and clear. To Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Daniel, thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose yourself, and that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up, who see you, who value you. She looked around the table. Everyone here tonight is proof that love is a choice. You all chose to be here, and that means everything. Everyone raised their glasses. I felt tears on my face, but I didn't wipe them away. These were good tears. The kind that come from being seen, valued, celebrated. After dinner, I found myself standing alone at those enormous windows again. Early morning this time, before anyone else was awake. Coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. I thought about the year before, how I'd stood in almost this exact spot, broken and trying to piece myself back together. How I'd almost sent Robert a text apologizing for existing. How I'd deleted it and chosen myself instead. I thought about the cafe confrontation, the letter, the 73 calls I never returned, the relationship with my son that would probably never be what I'd hoped for. People asked me, in the months after that first Christmas, if I regretted it, if I wished I'd handled things differently, if I missed Robert. The answer was complicated. Did I miss the son I thought I had? Yes. Every single day. Did I miss the relationship I'd hoped we'd have? The grandmother role I'd imagined playing in Jacob's life? Absolutely. But did I regret choosing myself? Did I regret setting boundaries? Did I regret spending $52,000 on a Christmas that celebrated me instead of funding another one of Robert's crises? Never. Not for a single second. Because here's what I learned in the year between that first text message and this second Christmas at Valley Ridge. You can love someone completely and still not let them treat you poorly. Those two things can coexist. Love doesn't require you to accept disrespect. You can grieve a relationship while celebrating your freedom. Both feelings can be true at the same time. You can mourn what you hoped a relationship would be while acknowledging what it actually is. And you can be a mother without being a martyr. I'd spent 70 years believing those two things were synonymous. That good mothers sacrificed everything, accepted anything, never set boundaries that might cause discomfort. But martyrdom isn't the same as love, and teaching your children that they can take without giving isn't actually helping them. It's crippling them. If you're watching this, and you see yourself in my story, if you're the one always giving, always accommodating, always waiting for crumbs of appreciation, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me decades ago. Your presence is not a burden. Your love is not an inconvenience. And you deserve to be celebrated, not tolerated. It's never too late to choose yourself. I was 70 years old when I learned that lesson. Don't wait as long as I did. Daniel and I still own the home where we raised Robert. We haven't moved, haven't sold it to fund our new lifestyle. But we're not there very much anymore. We travel now. 3 months a year at minimum. We've been to Italy, where we spent 2 weeks in Tuscany drinking wine and eating pasta and feeling young. We went to Scotland, where Daniel finally got to see the highlands he'd been dreaming about since before Robert was born. We visited New Zealand, hiked mountains we had no business climbing at our age, and laughed about how our knees complained the next day. All the places we dreamed about but never prioritized because that money could always go to something more practical, to someone who needed it more, to Robert. Claire visits every summer. She's in college now, studying psychology. She says I taught her the most important lesson of her life, that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. You get to choose who walks through. She's applying that lesson to her own relationship with her father, learning how to love Robert without letting him control her. As for Robert and me, we've exchanged a few texts over the past year, mostly about logistics. His birthday, mine, acknowledgments of holidays. The messages are cordial, polite, surface level. Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you have a good day. Thank you, honey. Hope you and the family are well. It's not close. It's not the relationship I'd hoped for. But I've made peace with that. I left the door unlocked. I never said Robert couldn't be part of my life. I just said he couldn't be part of it on his old terms. He's welcome to walk through that door anytime he's ready to value me instead of use me, To see me instead of dismiss me. To love me instead of tolerate me. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm also not waiting on the other side of that door anymore. I'm living, really living, for the first time in 70 years. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. Let's support each other. Because here's what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. Peace doesn't come from being wanted by everyone. It comes from respecting yourself enough to walk away from anyone who doesn't.